All right, we are recording. Going to call the planning commission meeting for September 2023 to order at 5:34 and a half minutes. March 9th. Okay, first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Any questions and or comments in reference?
Motion approved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi, this is Bailey Thompson. I'm going to abstain from voting on these ones because I was not there.
Certainly.
Oh.
And for the minutes you talked about?
Yes, for the minutes.
Gotcha.
And who's it?
Bailey.
Oh, okay. I didn't see
He's joined us remotely.
anything or,
Yeah.
this is like, okay.
It goes from the, Will, you good with the minutes for today? Not minutes, the agenda for today.
Sure, agenda is fine.
Yeah.
But just since there's a voice review on, could you remind me how this works?
So Bailey, because he is out of town, requested to attend remotely ahead of time, so he's attending remotely. And we have a quorum here, so we're good that way, so he can attend and he can participate that way. Does he, even though he's remote, he still votes?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
so everything's normal, it's just he's
Yeah, just remote.
the voice in the sky.
That's it, thanks.
Okay, awesome. And chair votes aye, so the minutes are approved, agenda is approved. Boy, I'm gonna say minutes all night long. Okay, next on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Bailey has abstained because he was not in attendance. So as soon as everyone knows their stand on the minutes for November and December of 2022.
I don't have any changes or comments.
Okay. Well, were you good with the previous minutes?
I do have one question.
Okay.
On the December minutes.
Yes.
There was discussion of the bylaws,
Mhm.
and we talked about the resiliency committee.
Mhm.
And it just says that it's the last paragraph of the discussion of updated bylaws,
Mhm.
where it says, staff advises these items to be directed by town council. Resiliency committee has been dropped as the commission does not believe this committee is part of their purview and has had issues creating a full committee. We didn't really drop the resiliency committee, but now it's no longer part of the commission. So I just wanted to clarify that and hope that the resiliency committee can
Right,
come
we
back at some future point.
changed it to ad hoc status rather than a full
Now,
committee
let's just
status.
drop that last sentence. If it wasn't dropped because it's out of our purview,
Right.
clearly resiliency as it relates to issues of, either comprehensive plan and so on, it is in our purview, but not the entirety of what the resiliency initiative could do. So I just, think that for clarity, it would be good to just drop that last sentence.
Which one?
It said,
It's the last.
It's not, it's up a couple from the
That's what I'm asking.
begins with,
does not believe it is part of their purview. And I would just strike that from there.
Where it starts with resilience committee, if you count the
Yes,
fourth line from the bottom,
right.
starts with resilience committee.
And while we did remove it from our bylaws, and while we do think that it is out of our purview, we also wanted to see that it could be carried on at a local level or even a regional level at some future point by the same.
Well, rather than completely drop it, I would rather say resilience committee has been moved to an ad hoc status.
Okay.
Just leave it at that.
I think there's a little bit more there. In part, my recommendation to remove it as a standing committee as structured was that we couldn't get participation from the other people mentioned in the way that it was structured previously. So the language, when it was a standing committee, and then replaced as an ad hoc committee without the outside mandatory participants.
Yeah, so changing it to the ad hoc is our way of being able to be much more flexible with it. So if we just make the statement it was changed to an ad hoc committee, then we can flex back and forth how we're working that committee.
Yeah.
That we were not getting into the weeds of it for this particular piece.
So can we just change it from saying the resilience committee was changed from a standing committee to an ad hoc committee?
Yeah, we can do that.
Is that suitable to my colleagues?
Yes, I have no objections.
It works for me.
Okay. Otherwise, is everyone good with the minutes as they stand?
We move that we adopted both, November, December.
Well, Bob had a movement to approve, were you willing to
I
make
thought we were
that?
just doing the November, so a new motion is fine.
Okay. So if you want to accept as amended?
Exactly.
Okay,
For both, November and December minutes, accepted as written with the, changes.
amended as stated.
Yes.
Okay.
So to be clear for our record, so the November 2022 minutes are recommended for approval, subject to the change that was
Where we
proffered
say change from a standing committee to an ad hoc.
to an ad hoc committee.
Correct. I thought that's December.
That's December one,
Yeah,
okay.
December.
Yeah,
Okay,
November is unchanged.
yeah, okay.
Correct. No, amendment says this. Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, minutes are approved.
I'm sorry, I didn't chime in yet because I wanted to ask a question if you don't mind.
Sure.
And I just don't remember which way we normally do this. So on December, the public comment part, some people normally say like, I'm Joe and I live here in town and sort of give their identifier. Do we usually capture that in the minutes? Because this is much more generic. I didn't even remember sort of what was our common practice or Mr. Dooley, you have a suggestion on what the ideal practice is?
The practice would be to capture the names of the speakers, and that would be captured by, if they don't offer their names, to ask for their names or ask for a name. So we have a reference to it for record.
Okay, so would it be acceptable that we approve these pending and you can, with staff to, if we have that information?
If we have that information, we
To
would
insert that as available.
Yes, I just, yes.
Okay. And then, the reason why I'm in agreement with you is because it says Mr. Nelson. And then, although we recognize who Mr. Nelson is, I don't think anywhere else in here it says it has any other kind of reference. So if it's just name, I'm very good with having that in there, but not any other unnecessary,
Yes.
like address and stuff like that.
I'm sorry, I was on the prior part, I was on the public comment section. I
Yeah,
didn't know.
that's what I'm looking at.
I didn't know if that's a Mr. Hall part. I didn't know
That's
this.
another one.
Typically, the way I've seen minutes is that you identify if somebody's speaking, you identify that person's full name or what the name that they offer.
Mhm.
And then you make reference to that person throughout, or the speaker or something to that effect.
Okay.
You have a record of it.
So if it's already in here somewhere else, which I don't see it, then I wouldn't change it, but I don't see it anywhere else, because in the November, it's the same, Miss Odom, and there's like no first name associated with it.
The first names I think are probably, if you have a last name, that's probably more critical than just having somebody's first name, but if you really just have a proper whoever they were, whatever.
So like, let's say Bob Smith, do we have a Bob Smith in town? We probably do. Okay, thank you. Bob Smith comes up to speak at the podium, and they're referenced in here as Mr. Smith. How many other Mr. Smiths are in town?
Typically, we would, and we can make sure that going forward that we make this very clear.
Okay.
At the very beginning of the minutes, the way I've seen them is it says, Bob Smith spoke, or Mr. Smith, and then referring to Mr. Smith throughout.
Yeah.
There's reference, but
I mean,
we should try to get the capture the full name where possible.
thank you. Yeah, like I was saying, if there was a spot where it detailed, these are the people who signed up for public comment, and then farther, then as they commented, it referred to Mr. or Mrs. whomever, I would be fine with that as well. Would you agree with that? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, you can put it as the,
Yeah.
like for the other list of folks, that's fine.
Yeah, that would probably be easier, just to add a list of who the public comment people were.
It's just trying to be respectful, since we ask people to identify themselves, and then
Right.
have that be in the record.
Right.
One of the things that we want to make sure that we do, and we kind of remind everyone, either one of us remind each other, is that we have a speaker, we want to make sure that we ask them their name.
Yes.
So we have that.
So, should I make a motion to modify the prior motion to include staff making these edits if the information is available? Pending that, we approve them.
I don't think it's necessary, because we said, with amendments, and we talked about the amendments with the list, so. And he's put it in the record, and they're gonna take care of it, so.
And going forward.
And going forward, we know.
But I'm saying inclusive of the other thing that was mentioned, which was the part about Thursday.
I've captured that.
He's captured them all.
That's what we're approving.
Yes.
But,
Yes.
okay,
We're
that's
changing it
my
to,
intention.
we're changing it to
That's-
resiliency committee was changed for a standing committee to an ad hoc committee.
Yes, and the inclusion of list of public speakers. Okay. So moving on to the public comment on non-hearing related plan commission matters. We had an item that was emailed to us that we will simply be receiving into. We'll simply be receiving it, we're not going to be reading it. And I see no one else in the audience for public comment. Was there any other than the? Okay. Then public comment section is closed.
Mr.
Yes.
If we receive a written public comment
Mhm.
at the town council meetings, we do actually do that out into the record. And I don't know what it is. Oh, okay, I understand your advice of attorney, this one will not be. Okay.
Normally I would say 100%.
Okay.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is the CIP, and it is attachment number 1.
Good afternoon, members of the Planning Commission. India Adams Jacobs, Town Manager, here to give you the update on the CIP for FY 24-28. I also have our Deputy Director of Public Works, who is here to answer any questions that I may not be able to answer this afternoon. So moving on to the next slide. A little bit about background and process. I gave a little bit of background on this a couple months ago, but we obviously do our CIP process every year. It starts back in October. The minimum criteria is $20,000. We get input from the planning commission. It ultimately has input from our department heads, town staff, and it ultimately goes to town council for final approval.
Can we take a break for just a second? You have a question?
Yeah, I did. Before you get into the details, just so I'm reading this with the right frame of mind. And I've asked Mr. Dooley this previously. He thought you may have the best answer of an explainer of what our role is and what we are doing. Like, as I read this and as I'm listening to you, what lens, like what's our potential action, or what's the lens I should be taking this information in?
To receive the background, we work most closely with the chair and the vice chair on the steering committee, as well as staff. So your role is to really receive it, provide any feedback that you may have, but most of the CIP planning goes on with our town staff and our financial advisors, but for you all to advise in case there's anything that you think we be missing.
So it's is it like a comment authority, or?
I respectfully ask if I can get through the presentation and answer any questions at the end.
Sure.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the CIP process, which might give a little bit more input or background. We start in October, it goes through November and December. In February, we draft this with our financial advisors. We are here today in March to present this to the Planning Commission. We will present to Town Council as well, and then ask you all to set a public hearing in April, and then adoption by Town Council in May. It has alignment with the comprehensive plan goals, which include supporting projects funding for public works, parks, recreation and culture, administration technology, public safety, resiliency, and sustainability. Moving on to the next slide, or 2 more slides.
Oh.
Sorry, thought you.
One more?
Yep, one more. Has alignment with the state code authority that says local planning commission may, at the direction, which Mr. Knuckles, I think this clearly answers some of your questions as it relates to maintaining compliance with state code, to be prepared to carry out policies adopted through the comprehensive plan. That is why we include feedback from the planning commission. Moving on to the next slide. I'll do a quick overview of some of the CIP projects that have been completed over the last couple of years or that were in progress. Robin Grove Shoreline, which is something that we brought to you all last year. Our stormwater management plan has been rolled into stormwater management and resiliency. That's underway. Our improvements to the bike and golf cart paths, which I'll show a picture of later. Moving on to the next slide. Connecting the Meadows and Classic Shores to extend Dwight Avenue. We worked with VDOT and received a grant for that, for the Dwight Avenue extension, which you will see. The new municipal station with police station, that item has been before council. We are waiting direction on the site. Preliminary space needs analysis and design costs will be underway, including once council gives us direction to move forward. Next, shoreline erosion and control at North Beach. That project is underway with the Army Corps. We are in the scoping phase. We actually have a meeting with them next week. So we will figure out pretty soon whether or not that project is officially greenlit and move forward. Classic Shores build out phase 1. We have no update on that one. Moving on. Streetscape for Colonial Avenue, that's included still in our plan moving forward. Central Drainage Area project is something that we are officially under contract with and will be hopefully breaking ground in the coming weeks. Our trash truck was an item that was purchased last fiscal year. And there's a couple pictures of the Robin Grove shoreline and then the bike offer path that was recently completed with ARPA funds. Projects that were completed in 2023, a dump truck was purchased, Bobcat was purchased, operations truck, town pier refurbishment to the tune of about $60,000 was replaced. Our north side bike golf cart path improvements at about $225,000 with ARPA funds. We're still waiting on lights to come in this spring to complete that. And then Castlewood Park improvements, which included fencing and some other upgrades. We will also be including new surface there as well for that playground. Look ahead, this was a snapshot of some of our new projects underway, but I'll show more in depth as we move on to the next slides as we break down the spreadsheet. I will turn it over to our deputy director to talk about the public works. New items, we won't belabor the point on the items that were there before, but specifically what was in red, items 1 through 5 briefly.
So the storage facility is a new building to be built at the existing public works facility to store our implements, pipe, and critical equipment, so we don't have to repair it because Mother Nature's hard on our equipment. So it'll be a savings to store our equipment inside the building. The new trash truck, these trucks usually have about.
Pardon me, is your mic on? I know we have some mic problems issues.
The new trash truck is scheduled for 2025 for replacement. For replacement of the old trash truck that was purchased in 2015, these trucks usually have about a 10-year lifespan. When they go out, they work hard all day, every day, and it's a lot of wear and tear, and sometimes they work 7 days a week. The new beach rake and tractor, the beach rake is from 2005. We have been managing it the best we can, but it's old. It also during the summer receives a lot of use. Beach is hard on it. The beach is our main attraction to the town, so that's why we want a new rake to keep it beautiful. Right-of-way survey is so we know where all the town road right-of-ways are, so we know where we can and cannot put things like telephone poles, meter boxes, sidewalks. The HVAC system for town hall, we would like to replace the existing boiler that has continued problems, is expensive to run, unsafe to run for the town employees in the building, with mini splits so that it'll be more efficient and keep the building operational more consistently.
Just a quick question. How many mini splits are we talking about?
3 to 4.
And you think this number is going to cover 3 to 4 mini splits?
That's an initial number that we have, that we've received. We are continuing. This has come up more and more in the last couple of months before this was put in. So we're trying to get those numbers locked down. We think it'll be close.
Are there any there now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so this would be in addition.
Yes, ma'am.
The air conditioner doesn't include, the ductwork is still okay.
There is no ductwork. Currently, the heat is done with a boiler that is probably from the early 70s. I'm actually trying to date that now. Parts are incredibly difficult to get for it, and it's very expensive to run with oil. And we're trying to get away from that and get to mini splits, which would be individual room heads with outdoor units that would allow the room to stay cool or warm depending on the time of the year.
Okay, so
and they would be transportable to be used elsewhere if we ever left the building.
I got you. Okay, I appreciate that information because, yeah, a whole new system, but it costs more than $50,000.
Yeah.
I think, triggers bringing up. Thank you.
All right. Some of the other items there were from the previous CIP that you all adopted. So the Dwight Avenue is there. The sidewalk study that you all included last year, we're still trying to identify a grant for that, but our public works director identified that the right-of-way study would need to happen first, so it would be a 1 and 2 on that approach. You can move on to the next slide, Darla.
The colors on that slide mean anything? Sorry, the colors on that slide mean
You got
anything? The red ones versus the black ones?
They were just additions. The red equals new project or new additions to the CIP versus the projects that were there were from last year, from prior year. Under Parks, Recreation, and Culture, we have the town pier refurbishment. Our new public works director has worked on a strategic plan to repair pilings on a more preventative maintenance schedule. So those numbers are included there. The streetscape was held over from before. We will have to work on design on a new town excursion pier if that's something council wants to give direction on. We are awaiting information from our Parks and Rec master plan to get hard numbers on numbers 15 and 16. and then pursuing grant opportunities for business improvement grant and facade grants.
So reference to streetscape, it's listed under grant, has that grant been identified, or is that still in the and looking for
We're still looking for that. That's about the amount of money that we think that was in the previous priorities and CIPs when I received it.
that? Okay, thank you.
Next slide. Administration and technology, what was there before was our town hall, or our town website that has been replaced at this point. We have the municipal center, which we've talked about as well. We have some estimates there that are included. Moving on to public safety, our chief of police has identified our body cameras and accessories as an essential need. The cameras that were purchased several years ago are now past their useful life, and the vendor does not support any additional upgrades to them. So we have to upgrade all of our cameras and the accessories that go along with them. Luckily, we've identified an ARPA grant, and the application is actually due this Friday. So we will hopefully try to get that equipment as well as a police vehicle in through that ARPA grant. But those are essential needs for our public safety. We included a town parking garage in there from before. If we find an opportunity where someone will fund the garage for us for free, we will plug that number in, but still want to keep it in as an identifier.
Absolutely. Just a quick question on the cameras. What's the useful life on those, do you know?
Usually it's about between 5 to 7 years, but these things evolve rapidly. As those of you who work in the technology industry know. And the ones that we have just are no longer supported. So if we have one that goes down, we'll have to replace that and then replace that with.
Goes with it.
Yes. Yeah.
And how many do we have?
I'm not recalling the number right offhand. We have
20s?
probably somewhere between probably 15 and 20.
15 and 20. Thank you.
Next slide. So the resiliency plan is stormwater management. That is currently underway. Why you don't see all of the numbers there, that was funded in previous years from ARPA funds and grant funds. So that's underway. We have a GEMS grant that has been identified. We are still waiting on a firm number on that as well as a location, but they hope to get back to us this week. Staff has been in contact with them, so we hopefully will have more information by the time we come back to you all. The shoreline erosion control project, North Beach, they've given us some rough estimates. It's been very difficult to really tie down a potential date. We are in phase 3, but the construction timeline on that is really about 18 months from the time that it gets kind of greenlit. So we are projecting out the cost for that in 2024 for that, and then another bulk in 25, and then in 26 as well. Moving on to beach renourishment and erosion control, we received final information from them on a beach survey that they worked on for about a year to include South Beach, Irving, and the boardwalk, and they provided our public works department with some estimates on just sand and beach renourishment, but there's also a portion of erosion control that will need to happen there with the riprap and the breakwaters, to elevate the breakwaters. Chris, did I get that right? Yeah. So we'll be working on hopefully identifying a grant for that as well, if not using some of our town funds to get that accomplished. And I'll turn this over to Chris to talk about our water fund utility project.
If I could just interrupt again, sorry, because I lost the headers meant from the earlier slides. Just pick one as an example. So the first one on this line is like $90,000 and it says 0, 0, 0, 0. What are those individual columns mean?
That's the fiscal year.
And those are years what through what?
24 through 28.
Thanks.
So the communication system for our existing water system, known as MyNet, we have outgrown our existing initial infrastructure build out when it was installed to put all the meters through town. It has to be updated, which includes a new antenna, a new repeater, and a few spare parts just in case we have a critical failure, which we had actually a couple years ago. So that's what that $90,000 for is to upgrade that. The WWTP conveyor system is upgrading our press room building to be able to not have to have the guys rake this press sludge in the dumpster, get in the dumpster itself. It would make it a little more automated, and it would be safer for the guys, and it's all about safety. The generator for Third Street pump station is a pretty critical pump station, and it's a low lying area. That generator is from when the pump station was initially put in, and it's old. It's hard to find parts for. We keep nursing it along and repairing it, but eventually that could become a major issue. The SCADA system for WWTP is for the control system that actually runs the plant, because the plant is partially automated. And this is what helps notify personnel if there's an issue outside of operating hours.
Quick question on the communication system. Is that a single point? That's not a truck that has to drive around and read?
No, it's staged. I'm sure you've seen some of them. Some of them are on sign poles. There's repeaters and antennas and communication systems that are staged throughout town to run this back to us.
Thank you.
I think that's generator means operational generator or a backup generator. What does it mean?
It's a backup. Central drainage area has gone out for bid. We are now in the contract signing and negotiation phase. Hopefully looking to have a timeline in the next couple of weeks from the contractor and a start date.
And who's the contractor?
Sagres.
We actually signed the contract today, so we have a pre-con meeting for next week, so hopefully we'll get an updated timeline even quicker than that. The point drainage area replacement is there, that was identified by Dewberry at about $5.7 million. The Meadows Bluff replacement area is about $3 million. And then our CCTV truck, our sewer inspection camera truck, has been pushed out to 2026. And that was, I can let Chris speak a little bit more to what the CCTV truck is.
The camera truck would allow us to inspect the sewer lines that are existing in the ground and identify where we have issues, I&I, which is infiltration into the system, which obviously affects the plant and it affects the entire running system from the pump station, sewer backups, water in the system that we don't need to treat, that's rainwater. And that would allow us to identify some of those areas that we could get in there and repair either in-house or contract out in small scales.
And the camera truck is under what item?
It would be a grant.
Okay.
Can you explain what the 30, 31, 32, when you talk about replacement, does that just mean replacing broken parts or holistically, like putting a new, like from, like each section of town would essentially get completely revitalized?
It would be, so 33, the camera truck would allow us to go out and say, hey, this pump station's running a lot. We could inspect areas of town.
Sorry,
Meadows Avenue?
The top three, when you say replacement, what is that?
It would be sewer laterals, mains, replacement within those areas that have issues with I&I and that need to be rehabbed to eliminate I&I into our system.
So basically similar to the central area where they're going from Boundary up North Irving and back to
Yes, sir.
Colonial.
Yes, sir.
That
That's
kind of
exactly the
nature.
exact same process.
So from pump station, is that kind of a from pump station to pump station, or is that?
They would have to be identified. Those areas would have to be TV'd to identify where the exact areas are. And there was a research done by Dewberry that identified a lot of those by a model from how each pump station in those areas were acting on big rainstorms, which would be how much it run versus a normal day. And those hours would cause a jump on a rainy day. So they could model out the amount of water that that area is getting outside of normal operations.
But the camera would verify those models.
It would
figure
verify
out
where
the
it's
actual
coming from,
problem.
yes, sir.
And then also that would allow us mapping of all that infrastructure underground. We had talked at some point, a couple of years back about pursuing this, and one of the benefits was that we could start to overlay, what our infrastructure is underground to look at and identify the age of systems that are, in that need of at least examination, if not repair. And that will enable us to do an overall inventory of where we are, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Does that concept live outside of the capital improvements concept? The connection of the where the stuff is in relation to are those capabilities built into what we're seeing in these projects, or is that apples and oranges and these are separate things?
Not quite understanding the question.
So like if you accomplish one of these lines, does it automatically get, what Salute was talking about all the infrastructure gets snapped and stuff in the process of doing this, or is the infrastructure mapping really a separate feature?
So as the projects would complete, we would get as-built, and of course, we would also be on site inspecting too, and watching and mapping with our GIS system. So that would give, while the hole's open, we could actually identify, take pictures, identify what the different materials were in the ground that weren't part of the project, and we would get a more conclusive, hey, this is what's in the ground.
I think maybe to expound upon that, as part of the central drainage area process, Dewberry did initial analysis and research, and part of that research included contracting with someone to do the CCTV, but that cost about, I think it was like $30,000 just for that project alone. So if you start to think about how many of these you have over time, you run into the cost benefit analysis of, does it make sense? I will say, one of the things we're still trying to identify, the training that it takes to have someone to run that vehicle. We've seen some other localities have a CCTV truck, but they have the staff to do so. And then sometimes they will rent it out. We've seen some localities who have turned old ambulances into this and, kind of jerry-rig the inside of it to make it work like a CCTV truck, but without buying the actual truck. So we still have some more investigation to do and then to figure out the operational cost of operating it on an ongoing basis. So that concludes the presentation, and we can answer any more questions that you all may have. Thank you.
I think.
If there are none, we just need you all to set the public hearing for the next meeting.
I have a couple of questions. I'll go back to the process question I was asking earlier. So, because I think this could be read a couple different ways. So we talk about the capital improvement program shall include the commission's recommendations. Does that mean that essentially it doesn't go forward until we sort of figure out what this should look like, or does it mean that it goes forward as is and just includes like a side paragraph that says they have the following comments? How does this?
Last year, I believe the planning commission recommended it as it was drafted. I think the only addition that was added last year was the sidewalk study, number 10. And then you all recommended approval to town council. So based on my recollection. So that's what we're looking for to move forward with the process.
The only other question I have is, are these listed in order of priority? Or are they just on here as catch as catch can, whatever you can get to first, fund first, etc.?
The latter, the latter, yeah. Some of them that are, operational in nature that are, town funded, for the most part are must-sees. We haven't really included anything in here that is like non-essential. Some things have higher priorities right away operationally, like our storage facility to get some of our materials out of, the weather, HVAC system, just because of heating and air, the beach rate, those sort of things obviously take some priority. Also things that we have contractual obligations on that we've signed agreements on take priority as well, so.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering if they were organized on the list in any particular priority fashion, but if not, that's absolutely fine.
Couple more questions if my colleagues have any. And I would have a ton of questions that had, except I would like to put my spatial brain on and try and keep it relevant to this body. And along those sense, it seems like locations of things which are not specified, or I haven't seen anything in the narrative and I know this is happening in separate dialogues, like the municipal center, like where might it be? The same thing with the excursion pier, because to me, I'm thinking like that actually may have some impacts as it relates to parking and the other things that we commonly consider. The same thing with parking garage, which theoretically would be an offset to that, but only if they're in the same parts of town. So didn't know if there would be some way of indicating, even though you don't have exact answers to this now because it's a living dialogue, if there would be some way of saying, right, this is sort of like, some way to give the reader some general idea as to where each of these larger physical things may be located. If we're sort of thinking about, is it compatible with, as we're thinking of the.
Well, as far as the municipal facility, they haven't even done their space analysis yet, is that correct? They haven't completed that in the process?
It's near substantially complete. We are working with council to identify a site. So to your question about location, without having that would be premature. What we could do as we move through the budget process and complete the budget process, we can include the things that have, a location in a narrative in the budget, in the final budget document. But we would not put that in this spreadsheet.
Right, yeah, I think that would be great, especially with, and I think you kind of noted this a little bit, the concerns all of us have for parking in the town, obviously. So, being able to figure out the best place to put stuff when we come up with ideas, if we can add them where that's appropriate, that would be wonderful, thank you. But the excursion pier, I think the excursion pier concept is just a lengthening of the current town pier, is that correct? Or is that another?
I would defer to Councilmember Sullivan to expound on that.
This is just a very high level.
All we've done is, this is like a pie in the sky consideration.
Gotcha.
If we decided to do an excursion pier, which would basically be a pier that larger ships could come and stop and drop people off like they used to do in the golden era of the early 1900s, it would require a lot of investigation as to where it could go, because we're very shallow on the sun.
Yes.
And to get a big boat in, you gotta go way far out. And so it would take a lot of study. It would be somewhere within the shoreline of the town, on the river, but that's about as good as I could get.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
And just as a sort of a base assumption, as you're identifying these as the shorter term capital priorities, do these assume current growth continues, like steady state growth? Does it sort of assume like it's a snapshot as of today with no growth that's sort of happened over these, the 4 years or something? I guess, what's the assumption of just the status of town as to which year you put, why you might want to put things in different years?
Well, some of that is driven by when we get funding from outside resources. So ideally, we would want to plan the things that, as I mentioned earlier, things that have contractual obligations, things that are emergency in nature. GFOA identifies sort of prioritization in a way on things that relate to public safety, health, and wellness in that order. So that is sort of a way that we loosely prioritize those projects. I will say, I think when we started, at least when I started here, I had a Word document with some numbers, maybe. It was not in Excel, and there were some goals and some years and some loose timeframes. So we've been working with our financial advisors on this, and they sort of advise us as well as working with staff on the most critical needs, as well as the timelines that we have related to the ARPA funding. So it's an amalgamation of all those things. There's no perfect science. I wish there was.
And I have to say, and I think you would agree, that this is a substantially better
Yes.
document than we kind of started with a couple of years ago, where it was random and there were some crazy unknown priority things attached to it that none of us could figure out. So,
However, we still accomplished a good chunk of
Yes.
those things
Yes,
that were
very
in that
much.
document. So
Very
kudos
much.
to you all for identifying them and us for getting it
And a
done.
lot of those same priorities are here.
Yeah.
And the reason that the other ones that were on there 2 years ago are here is because we've
They're-
accomplished
yeah,
them.
they're done,
So
exactly.
it's progress.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, much better document. So thank you very much for that.
Since we're, I mean, we're not, growth is not our only goal, or certainly even a stated goal, but growth happens and it relates to the things that we sort of tee up as a possibility. So for things that I was thinking, like the sewer projects that have been identified, the trash truck that's been identified, are these things here in their near-term priorities because they are needed to support the people, the population that's here now? Or is this a limiting, or if we don't do these, is this going to be a limiting problem in terms of continued development? Because, if we can't, because some of these don't have funding, as you identified, some of them do, some of them don't. If we can't get money for them, are these going to be limiting factors to, the things that we're sort of teeing up in terms of areas of town that we think may grow?
Well, that's a pretty loaded question. I would say in terms of how we identify it today, there's been tons of deferred maintenance for decades. I mean, the central drainage area project has been talked about since I was 3 years old, just for, context. So we are catching up on things that just haven't been done. So in some ways we are working retroactively, and while we are looking to identify projects for the future, we are working on kind of the here and now. A CIP is 5 years in nature, so the snapshot is that 5 years. None of us have crystal balls to kind of know what's going to happen 5 years from now. Although we can look at Weldon Cooper Center data, and we know that we've grown 10% in a decade. So in some ways, we have some data that kind of guide us in terms of planning for this in the future, but it's based on the needs that we have, it's based on the financing that we have and what we can afford from a debt capacity, as well as priorities, with also looking into the future. So I think that's the best I've got for your question at this point.
The context helps that.
Plus the specifically the central drainage area, what I know of that project is it's kind of hanging on by a thread at this point now, when it is hanging on, because at times it pops down here. So the improvements that are going on with that will not only put us where we need to be for this, but it will probably facilitate a little extra use, I would assume, compared to the tiny little pipes that are in there now, compared to what they're gonna put in there. So
I will make a statement though, just as a general follow-up to your question about future growth or even sustaining what we have. Without the ARPA funds, we wouldn't be able to get a number of these projects done, and that was a once in a generation sort of funding structure and mechanism. And historically, the town has not funded its CIP through any other means other than the sale of town property. So as you start talking about growth in the future, as the town has sold off a significant portion of the property that the town owns, there will be no future funding mechanism unless we identify one. So as we start thinking about things like enterprise funds that will reduce the burden of our general fund, there's some opportunities to divert a funding stream to our CIP, which is something that town council asked us to look at, generating new revenue streams at our retreat, and we're definitely trying to do that to be able to sustain a CIP and get some of these projects moving forward. Because while we've been very successful with grants in the interim, that big chunk of money that we were able to get from the feds, and then the additional chunk of money we were able to get through our legislative affairs efforts was also ARPA related. So I don't want to say that money won't be trickling down at the rate that it has over the last 2 years, but just want to set realistic expectations that we may not be able to see another infusion of $8 or $9 million in the near future ever.
And for some historic context, because it was exclusively, the capital improvement projects were exclusively funded through the sale of town property, and we weren't selling any town property, there were no capital improvement projects that were done outside of general fund necessities. So just the resources that have come to bear in the last couple of years require a tremendous amount of kudos for staff being able to bring those in to help with some of these underlying things that people don't really recognize as critical because they're underground and they're underserved and out of sight. So as much fun as it is to talk about new science on the beach, making sure that the sewage goes where it needs to be, and a lot of these other projects that are also roll into not just safety, but general health and welfare, were essentially that, just pie in the sky recommendations that were disregarded largely, and it was a performative exercise. Whereas staff has come together in the last couple of years with the financial advisors to be able to make a lot of these things actionable, and we've accomplished more in the last 2 years than the prior 10 to that with respect to the CIP.
I'd also like to add that town council does a great job of setting priorities at our annual retreat now, which also help feed into this, as well as giving staff the ability to work through these projects and focus on them as well. So I did thank town council for that trust in us.
I do have a follow-up question about the stormwater management plan that's going to be rolling out here in the near future. We've identified under uses the point drainage area replacement, and in the year of 2025, we've allocated $7,710,000. But my question is, how do we know what priorities will be identified in the stormwater management plan? And we clearly know that a priority is going to be central drainage. We've seen the sewage in the street. But why are we looking at the point now prematurely before the plan comes out to identify critical areas?
So Dewberry had been doing I&I analysis in the point area, I think a year or so ago. So that number is there based on estimates that they had from their prior work. So I wouldn't say that we're identifying it prematurely, rather than it's a project that was already underway with Dewberry before we got to awarding stormwater and resiliency as a placeholder. That project is not moving forward at this moment because we're focused on central drainage, and staff of our size can only do about one of those at a time. But that number was included there. I'm not going to say that our stormwater management plan doesn't come back and say something different, but that work has already been done and that data has been shared with them as well. And they're still working actively to get data from Westmoreland County with GIS data and projects, historical projects to look at prioritizing projects moving forward, but that will take some time.
Thank you.
An important note is sewer and stormwater are separate but adjacent.
Yeah, and related.
Yeah.
Because of I&I. And yeah.
I realize the Parks and Rec plan, master plan, I think that's what it's called, is happening sort of concurrent with this. If they finish, or any of the things that they're talking about capital related and could appear, I'm just wondering how these timelines work up about as we're walking this through. You mentioned having a public hearing, and I don't understand those two timelines and whether they're nicely compatible or whether they're annoyingly out of phase.
Now, when you say timelines, are you talking about the timeline between our public hearing saying we think that this is a good list?
When we would schedule a public hearing versus when they are doing, if they even have anything that even relates to a capital improvement. I
think those are completely disparate items, because at this point, I believe the parks plan is just figuring out where the parks are.
So contractually, they have to have the plan completed by the end of June. We as a locality have to have, our budget timeline anticipates us having a budget adopted by May, the second meeting in May, which I think is the 17th. So in theory, we'll get the plan, and then that will advise an update for next year's CIP with identified projects. And I would imagine that this parks, recreation, and culture section will grow exponentially based on the feedback that they will have for us as part of that parks master plan. So that would be the time where that update would be. Now, that doesn't stop council from asking us to move forward just because there's no dollar here. I mean, the projects in terms of prioritization for the north side is number 16, and then Eleanor as well, number 15. We could still prioritize a project there, even though there's a dollar amount given when we get that plan back. So.
That's helpful. Thanks.
So For the moment, the public hearing, do we set a motion to
Yes,
do that?
yes.
Do we have a motion to move this to public hearing?
I move that we move this to public hearing.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
That's April, our next meeting, or?
Well, we have to schedule it.
We've scheduled for April.
You're not gonna be here for that.
That's right, I'll be out for April, I let Mr. Mack know.
But are you?
But I can attend,
Can you attend?
electronically, yes.
Sure, okay. Bob, does that work for you, having a public hearing for the CIP in April?
At our April meeting?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay, so we have a general idea, but we're gonna, just take a consensus vote. All in favor for moving this to public hearing for is it April 9th?
April 13th.
April 13th, meeting?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oh, I'm sorry.
And Bailey.
And he said aye. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, didn't mean to forget about you up there. By the way, did you have any questions?
No, I was good with it. Yep.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So we'll set that public hearing for the 13th. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is the annual report.
At the last planning commission meeting, the commission received the annual report and decided to defer it until the November and December amounts from 2022 were received and voted on. So at this time, since that action's already occurred, staff would recommend that the commission review the annual report and adopt it subject to any modifications.
I was gonna respond that, I think we've done a good job on this. And I just only have one little, item that I would like to share is that, the notice in the annual, report for the September 8th gathering is still referred to as a meeting only in the annual report. So I was wondering if we could just add that tagline that was added to the minutes that state, that the meeting notes, these are meeting notes and not minutes due to a lack of a quorum.
Yes.
And
yes.
that was wonderful.
Absolutely.
And which meeting is that?
9/8.
9/8,
September
gotcha.
8th.
Yep, gotcha.
meeting.
This was not, it was not a quorum.
Correct.
Right, and we put in the minutes that are online, the language that meeting notes and not minutes due to a lack of a quorum.
Is your suggestion like we just stick that at the top of the box on the right?
Oh, yeah, wherever, just anywhere.
Yeah, we can put it inside the box there.
So we had the majority of this except for the November and December, which have now been added in there, and I don't have a problem with any of the November and December that were added in.
No.
And, other than the comment that you made, I was good with the previous. Any other input?
I do not have any comments.
Move we adopt the,
Annual report.
the report as submitted with a one revision.
Okay,
I second.
okay, all in favor?
Aye.
And aye. Thank you.
Put it to the adoption, I think it's right, just out of curiosity, where does it go? Did it get published or what happens after we said yes?
It will get forwarded to council as the annual report from the commission.
And then it goes into record.
Yes. And we'll keep it.
And then that's available to the public.
Yes, yeah, the document's always available as a public record.
It ends up on the town website in the documents. architecture.
Okay, next item on the agenda is the PC Public, the Planning Commission work plan.
So the commission will recall on February 23rd that it meant to have a work session to discuss the commission's 22, 23, 24 work plan. Staff received those comments and revised the work plan. We have a revised one with the date for March 9th, as well as the one we previously looked at for February 23rd. Staff received those comments and made changes to the work plan as directed by the commission, or at least as understood by the commission. So we're resubmitting the work plan to you for your review and approval. I think you've captured everything that we heard. If there's any changes, of course, this would be the appropriate time and place to make those. With that said, unless there's any changes, staff recommend approval of the draft work plan before you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dewey. Now, the one we're looking at now has the text of revised draft updated for March 9th. Is that the most recent?
That's
Thank
the
you.
most recent one, yes.
And I guess procedurally, are we going to, I guess administratively, establish a process for updating or changing this, or are we just gonna do this on an annual basis? You know,
No, this is staff had mentioned at the prior meeting it's our intent to make this a living document. So we will be bringing this back to you, on a 30 to 60 day cycle. So you'll have an opportunity to review it, and we can make changes to it based on current events or immediate needs or changes or direction from the council.
That's kind of what I was getting at. So it'll essentially kind of end up at what's coming next at the bottom of the footnote of the agenda, so that we can just kind of address it as much as it or little as it needs to be. Okay.
Yes.
That's
Staff will work with the chair to bring this to you on a routine basis, so that you have opportunities to talk about it as a commission and staff.
I think that's great.
I would request as things get completed, if we could just a note on here in some fashion that they've been completed.
I'm sorry, Chair, I didn't hear your first part of the statement.
As we complete things on the list, if we could note somehow on here that they've been completed, in whatever fashion you feel is most applicable. I would probably say not in a color change, because anytime we print these things, they're always in black and white. So maybe some kind of just maybe adding a note in the title of it or something to that effect.
Staff added an additional column from the original one that has council action on here. So you have planning commission public hearing, planning commission action date, and then council action.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, perfect. That'll do it. So never mind the suggestion you've already got.
And also to Commissioner Christensen's comments, we went through and tried to define a little bit better the purpose of the zoning code text amendments and comprehensive plan amendments that we were looking at doing. That was one of your comments that were made at the last meeting, so we tried to refine that a little bit more.
Thank you for your efforts. It looks great.
Well, yeah, it looks like you've dropped the,
It's the dispensary ordinance that went down to here from there, so that's why there's an I in that.
what's down?
Reserve.
Something was referred to the town council, the monetization.
Yes, I mentioned that in the staff report, and I should mention this for my
Yes,
presentation. There were there were two items that were removed from the work plan since the commission last saw those. One was the monetization of assets, and we also dropped the temporary event permit ordinance. I did that in consultation with the town manager. It was felt that the monetization of assets really does not belong in the planning commission realm. It's more of a council staff consideration. So that was removed, and then staff found out that the Parks Department handles temporary events and has a process for that. I was not aware of that at the time that I first drafted that, so I removed that as well. Other than that, everything else stays on the agenda, subject to moving around as discussed.
Great, thank you. So for procedural process, the action that we would take tonight would be approving this?
Yes.
So, I wondered about that myself, because it seems like this is not a policy document, we're actually not making a decision, it's just a work document. It's a work.
That's why
It's a work plan. But even though we're not making policy, by saying, yes, we want to do this, I'm hoping that there's a way to share this publicly, but also have some narrative that explains, because like we've talked about this, but this isn't everything. But is there a way to both share what we put this time into with the constituents, but also have some blurb that explains what it is, so we don't.
I can respond to that in two ways. I think we can accomplish that. One, we are actually bringing the commission's work plan to the next council meeting to share with the council what you all have decided to adopt as a work plan. And then if there's an interest or desire, we can certainly add this to our website to also share with the community as well, so that can get word that way.
Yes, please.
Well, just like the budget process that we've just been through is so much more advanced than where we were just a few years ago, so is this work plan. And it's very much appreciated because, I think that, not that something might not happen in the future, or something could happen in the future that could change this a little bit, but at least it provides, a plan of action and what we're going to be doing primarily. So I like it.
And of course, as with the CIP, this is a living document, so it's always subject to change, and that's it. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Thompson, do you have anything?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
And chair votes aye.
Thank you.
Okay, next item on the agenda is the subdivision ordinance, and this one is just for discussion, for no action necessary, no official action to be taken on this.
Yes. So, get organized here. So we brought this back to the commission at the last meeting. We added, but to start with, Commissioner Luna had asked to include the words to include tree groves within the for preliminary plats for major subdivisions. We've done that. That's incorporated in there under I can tell you under item 32. It'll be on page 31. On there, we've identified forested area / tree groves to make that a little clearer. And then we also renumbered to Commissioner Al's point. We renumbered the under final plat requirements. They originally, the way it was originally drafted is they incorporated additional ordinance numbers rather than using letters and numbers to follow the consistency in the ordinance the way it was drafted. So staff went back and we've made those changes. so that it aligns with the way the rest of the ordinance is written for clarity. So there's not confusion in terms of identifying the various paragraphs under plat requirements, under sections 6.6-2-6.1 through 19, I believe. So we've used numbers and letters to identify those paragraphs rather than by doing it by individual ordinance sections. And then we also staff also wanted to clarify some of the timeframes for plat requirements. And I can turn it over to Darla, and she can discuss a little bit more about that as she worked in that section.
Yes, so in reviewing this and going back over it and looking at some of the preliminary plat requirements that were added to it, and looking at back over preliminary plats and the ordinance, the ordinance required preliminary plats for major subdivisions for the town. And so, but the state code has changed. I guess it was about, I'm going to say it was about 10 years ago. The state code changed to say that a planning commission or a town can ask for or require preliminary plat submissions for subdivisions that include greater than 50 lots. But you can't require a preliminary plat submission for subdivisions that have 50 or fewer lots.
Is it lots or units?
It's lots.
Okay.
Based on the subdivision of land, yeah. So, because units could be multifamily, but they're not individual lots.
Okay.
So subdivision has exactly to do with division of land. So it might be townhomes that are on single individual lots.
So it could, so that 50 number could actually be 100 units.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm saying to you that I recall when this happened because in a lot of localities went like, what are you talking about? Because a lot of localities require preliminary plats for subdivisions, you know, almost all subdivisions, except for very small subdivisions. But that is the state law change that happened. And so looking back over that section, I was like, oh, we definitely have to change that because the code has to be in compliance with state code. State code relative to ordinances, subdivision and zoning ordinances are very specific on things that a locality shall do and things that a locality may do. So we modified that language in that section that basically says a person is required to submit a preliminary plat for more than 50 lots, but 50 or fewer, it's voluntary. So a person could choose to submit a preliminary plat, but they're not required to. And then in that section of state code, it talks about timing for reviews of preliminary plats. And so it establishes in there, and we reference that code section in here as far as timing without going through and actually explaining, but basically staff has a certain amount of time to review a plat to see if it is complete. It includes all the minimum standards. Then staff would route that permit. And when the staff routes that permit to other reviewing departments besides planning, like Public Works, or if it has to be routed to VDOT, any of those other groups that review plats for us, they have 45 days to return their comments. And then, you know, we would have that scheduled. If it's one that's greater than 50 lots, we'd have that scheduled on a specific planning commission agenda so that we would fall within that time frame. If it's one that does not come to the planning commission because of it being 50 or less, then staff has that amount of time to respond. 2.
So the planning commission has no oversight over preliminary plats?
No, you do for those that are for
Oh, for 50 or more?
50 or more.
But for under 50, no.
No,
Let's volunteer.
unless voluntarily submitted by an applicant.
So, okay.
Can you refer me to the referral section that you were just talking about?
Yes.
Is that a change?
Just off the other version.
It is, it's not a new change in state law, but it needs to be a change in this ordinance because the ordinance is out of compliance with state law.
Right.
So it is 625B.
Okay, yeah.
Preliminary plat requirements. We still do have in here, which was optional before, and this is 625A. And I think I told you the wrong section relative to.
He's got 15.2-2260 for
Yes.
preliminary plat standards and state code.
Yes, that's the state code reference. I was looking for the procedures for preliminary plats.
That's be.
Major, oh, excuse me, it's 6.2, and it's actually, because major subdivision plat requirements. And then if you look under,
6-2-1.
yes,
This is on the preceding page.
yeah, that's where I was missing it, because the title's on the preceding page at the bottom.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's 6.2.1.
But it's the same code section.
It is.
Just forgive me for making a formatting problem, but I had trouble finding B because it's at the very bottom of the page, and it's not indented the same as A. Those little corrections can be made to make it right.
Yes. So that section talks about whenever any major subdivision is proposed for more than 50 lots. And before any final or record plats are submitted.
The reason I asked about
Shall apply to the plan.
the approval process for 50 lots or less is because we had the planning commission had the Dodson development before us, and we took action on that. And so that's 50 or less.
Mhm.
And so why did that come before the commission?
Well, at the time, that's what your ordinance spoke to, but your ordinance is not in compliance with state code. So any amendment to the ordinances need to comply with state code. I would say that in that case, that Mr. Dotson agreed to voluntarily bring it to you, because he wasn't required to by state code.
And the other interesting thing that happened in that process was, while we had a chance to look at the submissions, even before a plat was developed, we were told that final approval rests with the approving agent, in this case, subdivision agent. And so that's something that the planning commission didn't have a responsibility for. But I also recall that the town council doesn't vote on that either. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay, so,
In state code, the planning commission is state code gives the planning commission authority to review preliminary or tentative subdivision plans.